Okay, thanks very much, Frasier, and everyone who helped organize this symposium, to Leeds Beckett for hosting. I'm really glad to be here. So the subject of my talk today, actually I'm going to switch to my slide, my title slide. The subject of my talk is the artist and designer Edward Wright, probably in that order is the correct order, who's not an unknown figure. In fact, there's some really great writing and research about him, but most of it's scattered across out-of-print publications, and so his works has suffered from a dearth of visibility and understanding. And my intention today is to offer a lens through which to understand his highly varied output and activities while looking at just a few projects in more detail. So it's kind of like a little bit of a trailer for some future initiatives that hopefully will play out. Wright was an unorthodox and unassuming yet quietly influential figure who was active as an artist, designer, teacher, and writer in the post-war period. His experimental, we've heard a little bit about the sort of problematics of that word today, his experimental body of work encompasses many disciplines in media, including painting, collage, design, even architecture, and resists easy summation. One of several through lines which I'm going to focus on today is a consistent concern with language and its effects, primarily visual, but with a heightened concern for its material expression, a kind of materialist typography. I recently came across this sentence, it's a little small on the screen, in an essay by the American writer Lydia Davis, and subconsciously added the word visual in my mind, as in some of the pieces of visual language that persist in my memory are ones that seem stylistically awkward or faulty. And this echoes my intuitive attraction to Wright's work. It's often unapologetically raw and sometimes awkward, but these qualities are also what make it memorable and complex. Although his name wouldn't suggest it, Wright's mother was Chilean and his father was Irish-Ecuadorian. He was born in 1912 into a diplomatic family in Liverpool, and after spending his early childhood in Barcelona, his family returned to the UK where he attended Stonyhurst College, a Jesuit boarding school which greatly shaped him and his outlook. His great-grandfather on his father's side, Thomas Wright, here Latinized to Tomás Wright in the stamp, was from Ireland, and he fought alongside Simón Bolívar against Spanish colonial rule in South America. This stamp, which features a portrait of Thomas Wright, commemorates the 150th anniversary of an important battle that led to the founding of Ecuador. And in a kind of fateful loop, Kitty Stroud, Wright's wife, was also from Ireland. Yes, there in Cornwall. Throughout most of his career, Wright's practice included self-directed work, primarily drawing, painting, collage, commissioned graphic design work, and teaching, with each activity informing the other in a non-hierarchical way, and each shaped by his life experience. He had an early interest in art, but studied architecture at the Bartlett before dropping out due to a lack of funds. He briefly worked on film titles in London and Paris, and then learned typography on the job at a publisher under the guidance of George Adams, who was also an emigre and a former Bauhaus student. Wright's career was kind of delayed by financial difficulties, and it turned out a temporary move to South America, interrupted by the Second World War when he returned and briefly served as a cipher clerk decoding messages for the British Army, which I think has sort of repercussions in much of his work. But it gained momentum in the late 1940s and 50s. He had a solo show of drawings at the Mayer Gallery in London, was invited by Anthony Froshaug to teach at the Central School, and was active in the Independent Group, a radical group of artists, architects, and writers that met at the ICA in London and which prefigured British pop art. The relationships from these circles led to his first environmental and lettering commissions from architects such as Alison and Peter Smithson, Theo Crosby, who would later co-found Pentagram. In 1956, he participated in and designed the graphics for the landmark exhibition This Is Tomorrow at Whitechapel Gallery, which was organized by Theo Crosby and featuring members of the Independent Group. A primary conceit of the show was for collaboration across 12 multidisciplinary teams, which included, among others, the architects Colin St. John Wilson, the Smithsons, the artists Richard Hamilton, Eduardo Paolozzi, and Nigel Henderson, as well as the critic Rainer Banham. Some of these names are going to kind of reoccur in this talk. Wright's design for the exhibition graphics and catalogue was partially collaborative in keeping with the spirit of the show. A series of promotional posters were designed by each of the 12 teams using the typographic identity by Wright as a through line. The collage made for the poster on the right by Richard Hamilton has since become an icon of British pop art. The exhibition catalogue is a square measuring just 6.5 inches, and actually Froshaug helped to produce a facsimile about 10 years ago now. Its small size and functional spiral binding were likely due to the tight budget they were working with. The oversized title plays out dramatically over the first couple of spreads, literally and metaphorically crossing boundaries. The rough edges of the type is a little reminiscent of the typography of Willem Sandberg, whose work Wright admired. It adds a little warmth and was probably a byproduct of the enlargement method. The floor plan showing space allotments for each group suggests a clockwise movement through the space, kind of like IKEA. The catalogue includes some more conventional essays, as well as this playful series of poetic verses by Rainer Banham. And the type here is kind of interesting, set very small, about 6 point, maybe even less, in a font reminiscent of Garamond, but rougher and with larger word spacing. It's a proportional typewriter font likely available through machines like the Varityper or Justo Writer, which preceded the more well-known IBM Selectric typewriter, which was introduced in the 60s. Each group was allocated between 4 and 6 pages, which, like the posters, they conceived and designed themselves, creating an enjoyably eclectic visual essay. In the 1960s, Wright worked on some of the most prestigious commissions of his career, including the iconic revolving sign for New Scotland Yard, as well as other environmental design and lettering projects in a wide variety of materials. He also collaborated with leading artists in the British concrete poetry movement, such as Ian Hamilton Finlay, Eugene Gomringer, Dompierre, Sylvester Edouard, and he became director of the graphic design program at Chelsea School of Art in 1963. The largest commission he received in terms of scale was to design the exhibition graphics for the 6th Congress of the International Union of Architects in London. The invitation came again from Crosby, and in a similar spirit, the exhibition sought collaboration between disciplines, but this time in an architectural setting rather than an art context. And at the core of the commission was the design of 2 monumental murals on either side of the main pavilion. Hand-painted on scaffolding boards, the geometric modular letters are reminiscent of Russian constructivism, their intricate checkerboard-like pattern forming a visual puzzle to be solved, a kind of cipher. The mural spells out the phrase architecture of technology in the 4 official languages of the Congress: English, Spanish, French, and Russian. The largest letters extending from the ground to the roof are those shared by each language, with the exception of Russian, while the small letters, a quarter in size and color-coded, are those individual to each language. Here you can see the scale of the exhibition and its site on the south bank of the Thames. The pavilion had 2 main facades facing northwest, seen here, and southeast. The message is the same on both sides, but with small compositional variations caused by a slight shifting of the order of the languages. And these are the only known color photographs documenting the project, incompletely, sadly. But there was a primary color palette, as you can see. Wright designed a custom typeface for almost every environmental lettering project that he worked on, taking visual and material cues from the characteristics of the commission along with the fabrication requirements. This typeface was made for the signage of Hinsley House, a Catholic youth hostel in Covent Garden. Still blocky but less standardized and modular than his lettering for the IUA Congress, the playful forms allow for differences of shape and proportion within the logic of a stencil. The letters were designed to be cast in metal with a rounded profile, softening their effect. And at some point, a set of brass stencils was produced, though it's not known how they were used, perhaps for wayfinding inside the building. Wright often reused his typefaces in a different context, for example, in this case for a short-lived publishing venture called Verb Editions that he co-founded with his friend, the architect historian Joseph Wright, who just passed away. Letters like the G combined curved and wedged shapes in surprising ways, while the Y has almost digital connotations reminiscent of early LCD screens. You sense that Wright rethinks the logic of the system for each character and doesn't prioritize efficiency or overtly rationalize the forms. Having taught part-time since the early 50s with stints at the Central School, the Royal College of Art, and Cambridge, when he became director of graphic design at Chelsea, he was able to formulate a holistic pedagogy. Quote, overseeing an educational commune, unquote, as Robin Kinross put it. He evolved the curriculum to be less specialized, developing a rich and experimental design curriculum that drew on artistic culture and the humanities more widely. One of his former students and later collaborators, Trilokesh Mukherjee, said of his experience, quote, we lived, experienced, went swimming together, photographed Paolozzi in his studio or Colin St. John Wilson's house at Cambridge, walked up the narrow steps to Lawrence's of Bleeding Heart Yard to discover Japanese handmade paper and cherry woodblocks for engraving. We hung 20-foot-long concrete poems at the Brighton Poetry Festival. We went to hear Anthony Froshaug talking about typography and Ulm. Godot Iyomi came to read Spanish poems. We went on bitter cold days to draw in Brixton and discovered hot Jamaican meat pie at Joe's shop. In a series of experimental design exercises he co-created with Jean Collins at Chelsea, later published in the Journal of Typographic Research, Wright put forward the utility and expressive value of handwritten text as a typographic tool. Drawing on books such as Raymond Queneau's Exercises in Style, the assignment set forth a procedural, yet fundamentally open-ended set of prompts, tasking students with both writing the text and exploring its different organizational logics and expressive possibilities. In this series of sketches, a student worked with text that describes their observation of their immediate environment. And it's chopped up and reordered, first as a set of columns, and then as more free associative groupings. In a second series, the same student progressively enlarges a section of an earlier draft, perhaps initially using a photocopier, an early photocopier, but later reproducing them by hand. And in the third series, language disappears altogether as the text is restructured and rendered as an abstract three-dimensional form on the right, which could almost be a work by Al Lissitzky. Around this same time, Wright designed a lowercase-only wood type called Flaxman semi-bold, intended for use in concrete poetry. The simple geometric constructions of its letterforms owes a lot to Futura, a favorite among concrete poets. But Wright has worked in some interesting experiments like the unusual construction of the K and the T. The numbers with their more eccentric proportions feel perhaps a little at odds with the drier spirit of the alphabet. It was produced in 3 slightly atypical sizes, 10, 16, and 30 line. And my thanks to Kat at Camberwell, because I just took this photo yesterday morning, after seeing these woodblocks for the first time, which was great. The letters are simply drawn and don't have the subtle optical corrections you see in most typefaces, maybe because it was deemed unnecessary at the large size they were intended to be used. He was also trained as an architect, so sometimes he might have not been so interested in those details. The name Flaxman semi-bold implies it was made to complement the set of capital letters that Wright designed 2 years earlier for the New Scotland Yard sign, which is also called Flaxman. However, the two designs were not meant to be paired together, and while they share important characteristics, the capitals are more refined and draw clearly on early Roman and Greek models. This textile banner, designed by Wright and produced in collaboration with Chelsea students, features a poem in German by Klaus Bremer and translates to "A text happens." The banners were made as part of the Concrete Poetry Festival in Brighton in 1967. Fluttering in the wind. And Wright also designed the square poem by Eugen Gomringer, a key figure in the development of concrete poetry. 2 years later, he produced his own banner poem called Vowel Poem. It's set in Spanish, and 34 words are aligned to produce a vertical string of vowels, always in the sequence A, E, I, O, U, Y, which you can see on the right column in white and red, with one of the vowels repeated twice within each sequence. It's a very structuralist kind of poem. And here we see it strung across the ceiling in an exhibition at Chelsea. And you can see Wright in the bottom right drawing on a cigarette. Wright remained highly active through the 1970s, retiring from teaching at Chelsea in 1977 at the age of 65. He designed several survey exhibitions for the Hayward Gallery and made perhaps his most compelling independent graphic works, including a series of 3 large posters decrying the political coup in Chile in 1975, as well as another poster series exploring more abstract themes of vagrancy, gesture, and language. And after relocating to Cambridge in the late 70s, he then pursued mostly self-initiated work. The informal handwriting that was the unusual focus of some of Wright's teaching at Chelsea, and which we see here in one of his handmade notebooks, begins to appear in his graphic work for the first time. Throughout his life, Wright was preoccupied with different forms of communication in public spaces, along with empathy for the downtrodden and dispossessed who inhabited those spaces. And this poster, entitled The Vagrant, is part of an intended series of 4 bilingual posters in English and Spanish, of which only 3 were produced. It features 3 film stills of Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp character in the movies The Tramp and Gold Rush, which are progressively enlarged and abstracted until the last one becomes a kind of mnemonic symbol. In the top is a prose poem by Wright that meditates on the character's existential predicament, handwritten in English and Spanish, and it reads, "A vagrant with no fixed destination is unaware of a narrative he writes with wandering feet. It is soon scribbled over and lost." A second poster explores the relationship of vagrancy to language in its title, Codex Atarantinus. A codex is an ancient book, and the word Atarantis is a neologism that Wright created based on the word Atarante, which means vagrant in Lunfardo, an Argentinian slang. In slightly cryptic prose, the text describes a codex that records, that sort of registers vagrant slang, inspired by a story from his father. And Wright's commitment to improvisation is visible by the way the word night watchman slopes diagonally as he ran out of space. So he didn't remake it for this silkscreen edition. He owned a copy of Bruno Munari's playful book, a supplement to the Italian dictionary, which was commissioned by a producer of vermouth. The gesture on the right is described as meaning as thin as this, and in one of Wright's notebooks he wrote the words lean man, as in like a skinny man, next to a drawing of the same gesture. And this gesture is the subject of the third poster here next to a preparatory print on the left, and paired with the phrase, "the gesture goes before the word." The connection between the two is unclear, but the group of hands suggests perhaps a crowd appealing for visibility. And the last project I want to highlight takes us back to design for public spaces, an exhibition called Outsiders at the Hayward Gallery, whose theme and content are evocative of the almost atavistic quality of Wright's own work and his lifelong sense of being an exile, an outsider himself. Featuring 44 artists, it marked the first major exhibition of outsider artists in Britain. And on the title wall of the exhibition was a quote by Jean Dubuffet, carefully hand-rendered here in Plantain in this preparatory drawing. The catalogue is skillfully designed with a striking cover image featuring a drawing by Johann Hauser, also made into a button. The exhibition title appears kind of like a sticker, which could be interpreted as a warning, except the bright green feels friendly and optimistic. The condensed type is familiar from the This Is Tomorrow catalogue. The inside front covers are printed in red, a playful inversion of the cover, and Dubuffet's quote appears boldly on the first page, echoing its placement in the exhibition. The book's carefully constructed with a few color images appearing intermittently on coded paper in an otherwise uncoded book. And the typography inside is sparing but elegant, set in one weight of Plantain. The artists are presented in alphabetical order and mostly assigned 2 pages each, which could make for a monotone rhythm, but the diversity of the work and the layouts keep you engaged. Accompanying the exhibition was this simple yet bold folding guide with more Dubuffet quotes, and a playful manicule which combines typography and gesture, two of Wright's key interests, and recycled here from an exhibition designed for a Dada show that he also made at the Hayward a few years before. And the exhibition poster itself adding some warmth through the introduction of brown to the color scheme. And finishing up, this is a picture of Edward Wright from his second to last trip to South America in 1970, when he was invited to give a lecture at the Catholic University of Valparaiso in Chile. And Wright passed away in 1988, and this slightly modified phrase, I added the word Anne, was the title of the obituary by Michael Harrison in The Guardian in 1988, here interpreted by students in an exercise in my typography class at Yale. And I'm going to conclude with a quote from Wright's friend and colleague Dennis Bailey, who said, "Typography, like handwriting, was there to express words and meaning. Designing alphabets was a more personal contribution to the same thing. It was a craft that he loved, and I'm sure he preferred to physically work with the type than to make written specifications." Thank you.